Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to the sands of ancient Egypt, to a land where the Nile's waters were life itself, and the gods who ruled them could bless or destroy in the blink of an eye. Where a sudden storm, a failed harvest, or the roar of a lioness goddess could mean the difference between survival and ruin. Before we begin, if you enjoy quiet, dark stories from the past, feel free to support the channel with a free subscription. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I read every comment, and it's always incredible to see people listening from every corner of the world. So, find a quiet place. This is Myth Night, where you can close your eyes and drift into the legends of how the people of Egypt survived the wrath of their gods. The first light of dawn touches the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that reflect perfectly in the still waters of the Nile. Along the great river's banks, palm trees rustle gently in the morning breeze, their fronds whispering secrets that have been passed down through countless generations. This is Egypt in the time of the pharaohs, when gods walked among mortals, and the line between the divine and earthly was as thin as papyrus reed. The Nile flows north through this ancient land like a ribbon of life, its waters carrying the promise of abundance or the threat of famine with each seasonal flood. Villages cluster along its banks, like children gathering around their mother, their mud brick houses rising from the fertile soil in organic curves that seem to grow from the earth itself. The air is thick with the scent of baking bread, blooming lotus flowers, and the rich dark smell of river silt that will determine whether this year brings prosperity or hardship. In the distance, the great temples rise like mountains crafted by divine hands, their limestone walls gleaming white in the sun, their massive columns reaching toward the heavens where the gods hold court. The temple of Karnak stretches for acres, its forest of pillars creating shadows deep enough to hide mysteries that only the priests understand. Smoke rises from altars where offerings burn day and night, carrying prayers and pleas to deities whose moods can change the fate of the entire kingdom. The people of this land live in constant awareness of divine presence. Every breeze might carry a god's whisper. Every shadow might conceal a supernatural watcher. Every ripple on the Nile's surface might signal a shift in celestial favor. The gods are not distant figures dwelling on unreachable mountaintops, but immediate neighbors whose personalities are as real and complex as those of any mortal ruler. Ra, the sun god, travels across the sky each day in his solar bark, his mood reflected in the intensity of his light. Isis weaves magic in hidden places, her compassion balanced by fierce protective instincts. Set stalks the desert margins, his chaotic nature bringing storms that can bury entire caravans beneath shifting sands. In the markets of Memphis and Thebes, vendors sell amulets alongside grain and pottery, understanding that spiritual protection is as necessary as food and water. The eye of Horus gleams from silver pendants, promising to ward off evil influences. Scarab beetles, carved from precious stones, symbolize rebirth and transformation, while Ankh symbols offer the promise of eternal life to those who honor the gods properly. Children wear protective charms from birth, their parents understanding that divine favor must be cultivated from the earliest moments of life. The rhythm of Egyptian life follows the celestial calendar as closely as it follows the Nile's seasonal patterns. When the star Sirius appears on the horizon before dawn, the people know that the annual flood is coming, bringing with it the renewal that makes civilization possible in this desert land. When the moon enters certain phases, specific rituals must be performed to maintain harmony between earth and heaven. The priests track these cosmic movements with mathematical precision, understanding that the gods operate according to patterns that can be predicted if one possesses sufficient wisdom. But for all their knowledge and careful observations, The Egyptians know that divine wrath can strike without warning, turning abundance into devastation, order into chaos, life into death. The gods are not malevolent by nature, but they demand respect, proper worship, and adherence to Mat, the cosmic principle of truth, justice, and order that keeps the universe from dissolving into primordial chaos. When mortals forget their place, when pharaohs grow too proud, when priests neglect their duties, or common people break sacred taboos, the consequences can be swift and terrible. The desert that surrounds the narrow green strip of the Nile Valley serves as a constant reminder of what Egypt would become without divine blessing. Sand dunes stretch to the horizon like frozen waves, their surfaces shifting with every wind, burying entire settlements that have lost favor with the gods. The heat shimmers above the stones, creating mirages that remind travelers how easily reality can become illusion when one ventures too far from the protective power of the sacred river. In this world, where the supernatural is natural, where gods intervene in daily affairs as readily as nobles interfere in peasant disputes, survival requires more than just physical skills and material resources. The Egyptians have developed an intricate system of spiritual technologies designed to navigate the treacherous waters of divine politics, to read the signs that warn of coming wrath, and to perform the rituals that can turn aside catastrophe before it strikes. The great pyramids that rise from the Giza Plateau stand as monuments to this understanding, their perfect geometry reflecting the cosmic order that the pharaohs sought to maintain through their earthly rule. Each stone was placed according to sacred principles, each angle calculated to harmonize with celestial movements, each chamber designed to facilitate the pharaoh's journey through the afterlife. These are not mere tombs, but engines of spiritual transformation, machines for converting mortal rulers into divine beings capable of interceding with the gods on behalf of their people. As the sun climbs higher in the eastern sky, casting sharp shadows between the temple columns, the daily round of worship begins in earnest. Priests emerge from inner sanctuaries, carrying golden vessels filled with sacred water, oil, and incense. Their heads are shaved smooth as symbols of purity, their white linen robes spotless as fresh snow. They move with measured steps through rituals that have been performed without variation for thousands of years, understanding that any deviation might break the delicate balance between order and chaos. The sound of their chanting mingles with the calls of ibises and herons along the riverbank, creating a symphony that seems to pulse with the heartbeat of the land itself. This is the world where mortals and gods coexist in an elaborate dance of power and submission, blessing and punishment, creation and destruction. It is a world where survival depends not just on courage and cleverness, but on understanding the complex relationships that bind earth to heaven, mortal to divine, order to chaos. The gods of Egypt do not anger lightly, but when their wrath is kindled, it burns with the intensity of the desert sun at noon, capable of reducing flourishing cities to wind-blown ruins in the span of a single season. Unlike the distant deities of other lands, who might be appeased with occasional offerings and forgotten between festivals, the Egyptian gods live intimately among their people, observing every action, weighing every word, measuring the cosmic balance with eyes that never close in sleep. Divine anger springs from violations of Mat, that fundamental principle of truth and justice that keeps the universe from sliding back into the primordial chaos from which it emerged. Mat is not merely a law or custom, but a living force, as real and essential as water or air. When mortals lie, when they cheat in business, when they fail to honor their parents or abuse those weaker than themselves, they create tears in the fabric of cosmic order that the gods cannot ignore. Each sin is like a stone thrown into a still pool, sending ripples outward that eventually reach the thrones of heaven. But the most dangerous transgressions are those born of hubris, the prideful arrogance that leads mortals to forget their proper place in the cosmic hierarchy. When a pharaoh begins to believe that his divine nature makes him equal to the gods rather than their servant, when a priest claims powers that belong only to deities, when a merchant boasts that his wealth makes him independent of divine favor, the response from heaven can be swift and devastating. The story of King Kamwaset illustrates this principle with chilling clarity. This prince, son of the great Rameses II, was renowned for his wisdom and learning. His ability to read the most ancient hieroglyphs and understand magical texts that baffled other scholars. His knowledge made him proud, and his pride made him reckless. When he discovered an ancient tomb containing books of magic written by Thoth himself, he ignored the warnings carved upon the walls and claimed the divine knowledge for his own. The consequences came not as a thunderbolt or earthquake, but as a series of subtle disasters that seemed at first like mere bad luck. His beloved wife fell ill with a wasting disease that no physician could cure. His children began to suffer from nightmares so vivid that they feared to sleep. His scribes found that their writing instruments would not hold ink. Their papyrus crumbled to dust at their touch. The prince himself discovered that the stolen knowledge was slipping from his mind like water through cupped hands, leaving behind only the memory of loss and the bitter taste of divine displeasure. Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and healing, embodies the dual nature of divine wrath. Her golden eyes burn with compassion for the innocent, but they also blaze with fury toward those who spread violence and corruption. When plague sweeps through the land, when fever burns in the bodies of children, when wounds refuse to heal despite the best efforts of physicians, the people know that Sekhmet walks among them, her lioness form invisible but unmistakable in its effects. The goddess's anger can be triggered by the smallest acts of cruelty or neglect. A merchant who waters his wine to cheat customers might find his entire warehouse consumed by mysterious fire. A master who beats his slaves beyond endurance might wake to discover that all his workers have fled in the night, guided by dreams sent by the protective deity. A woman who abandons her children might find herself wandering the desert, following mirages that always retreat just beyond her reach. Yet Sekhmet's wrath is not arbitrary or capricious. Those who suffer under her anger have brought their punishment upon themselves through their own choices. The goddess offers many opportunities for repentance and reform before her patience finally expires. She sends warnings through dreams and omens, through the words of wise counselors, through small misfortunes that serve as gentle corrections. Only when these subtle messages are ignored does she reveal her truly terrifying power. The natural world serves as both the canvas and the instrument of divine displeasure. When the Nile fails to rise during the annual flood season, leaving fields cracked and barren under the merciless sun, the people understand that they have somehow failed in their duties to the gods. The river is not just a geographical feature, but a manifestation of divine will, its waters flowing according to celestial decisions made in courts beyond mortal understanding. Drought brings with it a cascade of consequences that touch every aspect of Egyptian life. Crops wither in the fields, leaving granaries empty and markets bare. Cattle grow thin and weak, their ribs showing through dull coats as they search desperately for grass that has long since turned to dust. Trade routes become impassable as wells dry up and oases disappear, cutting Egypt off from the foreign goods that have become essential to civilized life. But perhaps most terrifying of all, drought brings the knowledge that the gods have withdrawn their blessing, that the cosmic order has been disrupted in ways that threaten not just physical survival, but spiritual continuity. Without the Nile's annual gift of fertile silt, Egypt would revert to desert within a generation. Without divine favor, the carefully maintained balance between order and chaos would collapse, plunging the world back into the primordial darkness from which it had emerged. Sandstorms, too, carry messages from angry deities, particularly Set, the god of chaos and the desert's edge. When walls of sand rise from the southern wastes, blotting out the sun and turning day into night, wise Egyptians seek shelter, not just from the physical assault of wind-driven grit, but from the supernatural malevolence that rides within the storm. These tempests can bury entire settlements, erasing them so completely that future generations will find no trace of their existence. The sand carries more than just abrasive particles. It bears the essence of dissolution, the power to unmake what careful hands have built. Hieroglyphs, carved deep into stone, can be worn smooth by a single severe sandstorm, while buildings that have stood for centuries can be reduced to shapeless mounds in a matter of hours. Even more frightening, the storms sometimes reveal things that should have remained buried: ancient tombs whose seals have been broken, forgotten temples dedicated to gods whose names have been deliberately erased from human memory. Lightning, rare but devastating in the usually clear Egyptian sky, signals the intervention of gods whose anger has reached truly dangerous levels. When Ra himself hurls celestial fire earthward, the message is unmistakable. Mortal behavior has disrupted the cosmic order so severely that divine intervention is required to restore balance. Buildings struck by such lightning often burn with flames that cannot be extinguished by normal means, requiring the intervention of priests who understand the spiritual nature of the fire. The Egyptians learned to read these signs with the skill of scholars interpreting sacred texts, understanding that natural disasters were never merely natural, but always carried deeper meanings about the state of the relationship between earth and heaven. A locust swarm might indicate that the gods were displeased with the agricultural practices of a particular region. An earthquake could signal divine disapproval of a pharaoh's building projects. Even small signs, the unusual behavior of sacred animals, the failure of certain plants to bloom at their appointed times, the appearance of strange colors in the sky, were studied carefully for the messages they might carry. This intimate connection between divine mood and natural phenomena created a world where meteorology and theology were inseparable disciplines, where predicting the weather required understanding the temperament of gods as much as the movement of clouds. The Egyptians developed sophisticated systems for monitoring both celestial and terrestrial signs, creating calendars that tracked not only seasonal changes, but the ebb and flow of divine favor throughout the year. In the time when gods walked openly among mortals, and the boundaries between heaven and earth were as permeable as morning mist, there came a period when humanity's arrogance and cruelty finally exhausted even divine patience. Ra, the great sun god whose daily journey across the sky brought light and life to all creation, looked down from his solar bark with eyes that had grown weary of witnessing the endless parade of human folly and malice. The streets of cities echoed with the cries of the oppressed as the powerful exploited the weak without shame or consequence. Merchants cheated their customers with scales weighted by greed, while nobles took what they pleased from peasants too frightened to resist. Sacred festivals became excuses for debauchery rather than opportunities for genuine worship, and the names of gods were invoked to justify acts that violated every principle of Ma'at. Ra's sorrow transformed gradually into anger, then into a wrath so terrible that the very foundations of creation trembled. The gods' golden tears, falling from heights beyond mortal comprehension, turned to liquid fire as they descended, each drop carrying the concentrated essence of solar fury. Where they struck the earth, the ground cracked and split, releasing heat that could melt bronze and stone alike. In his rage, Ra summoned forth Sekhmet, the lioness-headed goddess of war and destruction, breathing into her divine form a portion of his own solar power that transformed her from a deity of measured justice into an engine of unstoppable vengeance. Her golden eyes blazed with fires borrowed from the sun itself, and her massive paws left prints that smoldered with residual heat long after she had passed. Sekhmet descended to earth like a falling star, her arrival announced by roars that shattered temple walls and sent sacred animals fleeing in terror. She began her work of purification with methodical efficiency, her claws and fangs finding those whose crimes had polluted the cosmic order. At first, her victims were clearly guilty: corrupt officials who had sold justice for gold, priests who had profaned sacred rites for personal gain, warriors who had slaughtered the innocent for pleasure rather than duty. But divine wrath, once unleashed, proved difficult to control or direct. Sekhmet's bloodlust grew with each life she claimed, her hunger for destruction expanding beyond the merely guilty to encompass all of humanity. The goddess's roars echoed across the land from dawn to dusk, accompanied by the screams of the dying and the crash of collapsing buildings. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble in a matter of days, their populations scattered like leaves before a hurricane. The surviving humans fled to the deepest caves and the most remote desert hideouts, but even there they could not escape the goddess's supernatural senses. She could smell guilt from leagues away, could hear the rapid heartbeat of fear through layers of solid rock. Her pursuit was relentless and seemingly endless, driven by a divine fury that had transcended its original purpose and become a force of pure destruction. From his throne in the heavens, Ra watched with growing alarm as his instrument of justice threatened to accomplish more than he had intended. The god had sought to punish the wicked and restore moral order, not to exterminate the entire human race. But Sekhmet's bloodlust had grown beyond even his ability to control, her appetite for slaughter increasing with each victim rather than being satisfied by it. The other gods gathered an emergency council, their usual petty rivalries set aside in the face of a crisis that threatened to depopulate the earth entirely. Isis spoke with her characteristic wisdom, pointing out that some humans had remained faithful despite the general corruption, while Thoth calculated that complete human extinction would disrupt the cosmic balance in ways that might prove irreversible. Ra found himself faced with a dilemma that even divine wisdom struggled to resolve. He could not simply command Sekhmet to stop, for her current state transcended normal divine hierarchy. The goddess had become intoxicated by violence, drunk on blood and destruction to a degree that made her temporarily deaf to reason or authority. Physical force would be useless against a being empowered by his own solar essence, and any attempt to destroy her would require destroying part of himself. The solution, when it came, demonstrated the kind of clever thinking that had allowed humanity to survive previous divine displeasures. Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, suggested a stratagem that appealed to Sekhmet's nature rather than fighting against it. If the goddess could not be stopped directly, perhaps she could be tricked into stopping herself. Working through the night with desperate efficiency, the surviving priests gathered every brewery and vineyard that had escaped Sekhmet's rampage. They worked by moonlight to avoid attracting the goddess's attention, their hands moving with practiced skill as they prepared vast quantities of beer according to recipes that had been perfected over generations. But this beer was different from any brewed before, mixed with red ochre and pomegranate juice, until it resembled fresh blood so closely that even divine senses might be deceived. As dawn approached, the priests distributed this crimson brew across the path that Sekhmet was expected to take in her continued hunt for human prey. Jugs and vats were positioned carefully to look as though they had been hastily abandoned by fleeing victims, their contents glinting in the early light like pools of spilled life. Sekhmet, arriving at the killing ground, with her usual thunderous roar, paused when she detected the overwhelming scent of what appeared to be fresh blood. Her divine nature should have allowed her to distinguish between real gore and cleverly disguised beer, but her bloodlust had clouded even her supernatural perceptions. The goddess began to drink eagerly, her massive tongue lapping at the red liquid with the enthusiasm of a creature that had found exactly what it craved most. The alcohol worked its ancient magic, even on a divine constitution, gradually dulling the sharp edge of Sekhmet's rage and replacing her focused fury with a pleasant drowsiness. As she continued drinking, moving from vessel to vessel in her determination to consume every drop of the apparent blood, her roars grew softer and less frequent. The fires in her golden eyes began to dim, replaced by the heavy-lidded contentment of intoxication. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Sekhmet had collapsed beside the emptied containers, her massive form breathing slowly and deeply in the first peaceful sleep she had known since her rampage began. The goddess's transformation back to her normal state was gradual but unmistakable, her features softening from the mask of destruction she had worn to the more familiar expression of stern but controlled justice. When she finally awakened, Sekhmet found herself surrounded by the priests and surviving civilians who had engineered her pacification. Instead of anger at being tricked, the goddess expressed something approaching gratitude for being freed from the compulsion that had driven her beyond all reason. She had retained enough awareness during her rampage to know that her actions had exceeded divine intention, and she was relieved to discover that her bloodlust had been quenched without requiring the complete extinction of humanity. Ra, observing from his celestial vantage point, declared himself satisfied with the outcome. Humanity had been sufficiently chastened by the experience to remember the importance of honoring divine will, while the survivors had demonstrated the kind of cleverness and cooperation that made them worthy of continued existence. The crisis had served its purpose without creating the cosmic imbalance that complete human extinction would have caused. From that day forward, so the Egyptians marked the anniversary of Sekhmet's pacification with the Festival of Drunkenness, a celebration that honored both the goddess's power and the wisdom of those who had found a way to redirect it. The festival served as a reminder that divine wrath, no matter how terrible, could be survived through a combination of courage, cleverness, and understanding of divine nature. The tale of Osiris offers a different kind of lesson about surviving divine displeasure, one that emphasizes the power of love and persistence to overcome even death itself. When Set, god of chaos and jealousy, murdered his brother Osiris out of spite and scattered the pieces of his body across the length and breadth of Egypt, it seemed that darkness had triumphed permanently over light, chaos over order. Isis, Osiris's devoted wife, refused to accept this apparent finality. The goddess embarked on a journey that took her to every corner of the known world, searching for the scattered fragments of her husband's body with a determination that even the gods found remarkable. Her quest became a model for the kind of devotion that could transcend death itself, demonstrating that love properly applied could reverse even the most catastrophic divine judgments. Each piece of Osiris that Isis recovered and restored brought back a portion of order to a world that had begun sliding toward chaos. Her tears, falling on the reassembled body, carried such concentrated grief and love that they awakened forces of renewal that had been dormant since the creation of the world. Where her tears fell, the first green shoots of vegetation began to emerge from earth that had become barren and lifeless. The resurrection of Osiris established a pattern that would influence Egyptian thinking about survival and renewal for thousands of years. Death was not the end, but a transformation, a passage from one state of being to another. Divine displeasure, no matter how severe, could be overcome through proper application of knowledge, devotion, and ritual. even the worst disasters contained within them the seeds of eventual restoration. As the first stars appear in the darkening sky above the Nile, the great temples of Egypt begin their most sacred work, the delicate task of maintaining harmony between the earthly realm and the domain of the gods. In the inner sanctuaries, where only the highest priests may enter, rituals unfold with precision that has been refined over countless generations, each gesture carrying meaning that reaches back to the very foundations of creation. The priests move through their preparations with the deliberate care of craftsmen working in precious materials, understanding that a single misplaced word or gesture might transform an offering of reconciliation into an invitation for greater divine displeasure. Their heads are shaved smooth as symbols of purity, their bodies cleansed with water drawn from sacred wells that have never known contact with profane hands. The linen of their robes is spotless white, woven by temple servants who have fasted for days before touching the threads. In the holiest chamber of the Temple of Ptah at Memphis, the morning ritual begins before dawn with the careful preparation of the divine meal. Bread must be baked from grain that has been blessed at every stage of its growth and harvest, kneaded with water from the Nile's deepest channels, shaped by hands that have been purified with natron salt and frankincense. The loaves emerge from sacred ovens with crusts golden as Ra's solar bark, their aroma carrying prayers upward on invisible wings. Beer, that most democratic of offerings, flows in streams of amber that catch the lamplight like liquid gold. But this is no ordinary brew. It has been prepared according to formulas revealed by Osiris himself during his earthly reign, fermented in vessels that have never held any other substance, flavored with honey gathered from hives maintained within temple grounds where no impure influence can contaminate the sacred work of the bees. The priests understand that gods, like mortals, appreciate beauty and luxury, but their divine nature requires purification that goes far beyond mere physical cleanliness. The oil that anoints sacred statues comes from olives grown in groves blessed by Isis, pressed in mechanisms that incorporate gold and silver components to ensure that no base metal corrupts the essence. The resulting liquid glows with an inner light that seems to pulse with divine approval when properly prepared. Incense rises in clouds that carry earthly prayers to celestial ears, but not just any aromatic substance will serve this sacred purpose. Frankincense and myrrh arrive from distant lands where they grow under foreign skies, but they must be further purified through rituals that transform them from mere botanical products into vehicles for divine communication. The smoke that rises from temple braziers creates patterns that trained priests can read like hieroglyphic texts, interpreting the gods' responses to mortal pleas. As the sun rises over the eastern horizon, its first rays enter the temple through carefully positioned openings that have been calculated to align with cosmic movements. The golden light strikes the face of the god statue at precisely the moment when the high priest speaks the words of awakening, a formula so ancient that its origins have been lost in the mists of prehistory. The statue's eyes, crafted from precious stones and gold, seem to flicker with awareness as divine consciousness inhabits the carefully prepared vessel. The feeding of the god follows patterns established when the world was young and the boundaries between divine and mortal were still being negotiated. Each type of food must be presented in its proper order, accompanied by specific prayers that have been preserved word perfect through generations of priestly training. The bread comes first, acknowledging the god's role as sustainer of life. Beer follows, honoring the divine gift of transformation that turns simple grain into something that can gladden hearts and ease suffering. Fruits and vegetables, each selected for symbolic as well as nutritional value, represent the abundance that flows from divine blessing when mortals maintain proper relationships with their celestial patrons. Meat, when offered, comes from animals that have been raised within temple precincts and treated with the respect due to creatures destined for sacred purposes. Their sacrifice is conducted with rituals that honor their gift while ensuring that their spiritual essence reaches the intended divine recipient. But the morning feeding is only the beginning of a cycle of observances that continues throughout the day and night. At noon, when Ra's bark reaches the highest point of its celestial journey, priests emerge onto temple rooftops to offer prayers that ride the solar winds to their intended destination. The sun's heat, rather than being merely endured, becomes a medium for communication, carrying words of gratitude and requests for continued favor across the vast distances that separate earth from heaven. Evening brings its own requirements, as the setting sun signals Ra's beginning of his nightly journey through the underworld. Torches are lit not just for illumination, but as beacons that guide the solar god through the dangers that threaten him in the realm of darkness. The priests' voices join in hymns that have been sung every evening for thousands of years, their combined power creating a spiritual shield that protects both the god and his people during the vulnerable hours of night. The people beyond the temple walls participate in these cycles of worship through rituals scaled to their means and understanding. In humble homes throughout Egypt, families begin each day by offering bread and beer to household shrines, where small statues represent the gods who watch over their particular circumstances. A farmer might honor Sobek, the crocodile god who controls the Nile's floods, while a craftsman pays respect to Ptah, the divine patron of all those who work with their hands. Personal amulets serve as portable temples, carrying divine protection wherever their wearers might travel. The Eye of Horus, worn on a chain around the neck, provides supernatural vision that can penetrate illusions and deceptions. Scarab beetles carved from precious stones symbolize the daily rebirth of the sun and the soul's potential for transformation through divine grace. The Ankh, symbol of life itself, reminds its bearer that existence is a gift from the gods that must be honored through proper living. During times of particular crisis, when divine displeasure seems especially intense or widespread, the scale of ritual observance increases dramatically. Processions wind through city streets, carrying statues of gods and portable shrines, allowing the deities to survey their domains and receive direct petitions from worshippers who might never enter the inner sanctuaries of major temples. These parades become festivals of reconciliation, opportunities for entire communities to demonstrate their renewed commitment to divine service. Sacred animals play crucial roles in these expanded ceremonies, serving as living embodiments of divine presence. The Apis bull at Memphis, carefully selected for markings that indicate divine favor, receives worship equal to that offered to the gods themselves. His every movement is interpreted for omens, his health monitored as an indication of the nation's spiritual condition. When an Apis bull dies, his funeral rivals that of a pharaoh, complete with mummification processes that preserve his body for the eternal journey that all sacred beings must undertake. The priests who conduct these rituals undergo training that begins in childhood and continues throughout their lives. They must memorize not only the words of prayers and hymns, but the precise timing, intonation, and gesture that transform mere recitation into effective spiritual technology. Their education includes astronomy, for the movements of stars and planets influence the optimal timing of various ceremonies. They study medicine, understanding that healing and worship are aspects of the same divine science. They learn the properties of plants, minerals, and other substances used in temple work, developing expertise that rivals that of the most skilled craftsmen and scholars. The most powerful rituals are those known only to the highest ranks of the priesthood, formulas so potent that their misuse could destabilize the cosmic order itself. These secret ceremonies are performed in chambers hidden deep within temple complexes, their existence known only to those who have proven their discretion and wisdom through decades of faithful service. The knowledge is passed from master to student through oral tradition, never committed to writing where it might fall into unworthy hands. These hidden rites include the opening of the mouth ceremony, which animates statues and mummies by awakening their spiritual essence. They encompass the daily journey rituals that ensure Ra's safe passage through the underworld each night, preventing the sun from being devoured by the chaos serpent Apophis. Most secret of all are the pharaoh's transformation rites, the procedures that will convert the king's mortal form into a divine being capable of joining the gods in their eternal existence. In the narrow streets of ancient Memphis, where mud brick houses cluster like children seeking protection from the desert wind, an old woman named Nebet carefully arranges small offerings on her household shrine as the morning star fades in the growing light. Her weathered hands move with practiced precision, placing bread still warm from her oven beside a cup of beer that catches the early sunlight like liquid amber. These simple gifts represent more than mere routine. They are part of a survival strategy refined over countless generations, a daily acknowledgement of divine powers that can make the difference between prosperity and disaster. Nebet understands what many modern people have forgotten, that the gods pay attention to consistency rather than grandeur. Her offerings cost little in material terms, but their regularity speaks of respect and remembrance that divine beings value above the most expensive sacrifices offered only in times of crisis. She has maintained this practice every day for over 40 years, through seasons of abundance and periods of want, through personal joy and family tragedy, understanding that divine favor must be cultivated like a garden rather than taken for granted like air. Her husband, Kaimwaset, a carpenter whose skills are respected throughout the district, wears amulets that reflect his particular needs and vulnerabilities. The Eye of Horus adorns his chest, its protective gaze warding off accidents that could cripple a craftsman whose livelihood depends on steady hands and clear vision. A small figure of Ptah hangs from his belt, honoring the god who watches over all those who shape raw materials into useful objects. Around his wrist, a bracelet of carved scarabs reminds him that each day offers opportunities for renewal and transformation. Before beginning work each morning, Kaimwaset performs a brief ritual that most observers would mistake for simple preparation. He arranges his tools in patterns that mirror cosmic order, placing his adze where it catches the first light of dawn, positioning his chisels to align with cardinal directions that correspond to divine influences. As he works, he whispers prayers so quietly that they seem like unconscious humming, requesting not just success in his current project, but protection from the injuries that can end a craftsman's career in an instant. Their daughter Taweret has learned from childhood to read the subtle signs that indicate shifts in divine mood and favor. She knows that certain combinations of weather, animal behavior, and celestial appearances can warn of coming difficulties, allowing those who understand the patterns to take protective action before disaster strikes. When ibises gather in unusual numbers along the riverbank, it may signal changes in the Nile's behavior that will affect crops and trade. When domestic cats display particular restlessness, wise families prepare for disturbances that may be supernatural in origin. The family maintains relationships with priests at multiple temples, understanding that divine politics can be as complex as mortal affairs. They offer regular support to the local temple of Sobek, whose influence over the Nile's floods directly affects their neighborhood's prosperity. But they also maintain connections with the priesthood of Isis, whose magical knowledge can provide protection against illnesses and curses. Small donations to the Temple of Thoth ensure access to scribal services and the wisdom of learned priests who can interpret omens and provide guidance during difficult decisions. Their social network extends beyond mere religious observance to include relationships with others who understand the importance of spiritual preparation. Nebbit participates in a group of women who pool their resources to sponsor larger offerings during major festivals, their combined contributions purchasing access to divine attention that none could afford individually. These same women share knowledge about protective practices, herbal remedies that incorporate both medical and magical properties, and techniques for maintaining household harmony that prevent domestic discord from attracting malevolent supernatural attention. Kayamwaset belongs to a craftsman's guild that functions as both professional organization and religious brotherhood. The guild maintains its own shrine where members gather monthly to honor Ptah and share knowledge about techniques that have both practical and spiritual dimensions. Senior craftsmen teach apprentices not only how to join wood and shape stone, but also how to work in harmony with cosmic forces that can influence the success or failure of any project. The Guild's protective practices extend beyond individual members to encompass their families and workshops. They maintain a communal fund that provides assistance when members face difficulties that threaten their ability to maintain proper relationships with divine patrons. This support might take the form of materials for offerings during times of poverty, payment for priestly services during family crises, or temporary shelter when homes are damaged by floods or fires that might have supernatural causes. Seasonal observances play crucial roles in the family's survival strategy, marking times when divine attention focuses on particular aspects of human existence. During the season of Akhet, when the Nile's annual flood determines the year's agricultural prospects, they join community processions that honor the river's divine nature and petition for optimal conditions. Their offerings during this period focus on symbols of abundance and fertility, demonstrating their willingness to share future prosperity with the gods who make it possible. The season of Peret, when the waters recede and planting begins, calls for different observances that honor the gods of agriculture and craftsmanship. Kayamwaset increases his donations to Ptah's temple, understanding that the coming months will test his skills as clients commission projects funded by anticipated harvest income. Nabit prepares special foods associated with growth and renewal, offering them at household shrines while praying for her family's prosperity and health. Shemu, the harvest season, brings its own requirements for divine acknowledgement. The family participates in Thanksgiving ceremonies that recognize divine generosity while humbly requesting continued favor. They understand that gratitude unexpressed can quickly transform into entitlement, a dangerous attitude that invites divine correction. Their offerings during harvest time are proportional to their good fortune, demonstrating that prosperity has not made them forget their dependence on powers greater than themselves. Personal protection extends beyond scheduled offerings and formal rituals to encompass daily practices that maintain spiritual cleanliness and divine favor. The family bathes regularly, not just for physical hygiene, but as a spiritual discipline that washes away accumulated negative influences. They avoid foods and activities that are considered spiritually polluting, understanding that some forms of contamination can make individuals more vulnerable to divine displeasure or supernatural attack. Their diet includes foods that are believed to enhance spiritual protection and divine favor. Bread made from emmer wheat, sacred to Osiris, appears at every meal as both sustenance and spiritual shield. Beer brewed according to traditional methods provides not just nutrition and refreshment, but connection to divine forces associated with transformation and celebration. Onions and garlic, whose strong flavors are thought to repel malevolent influences, appear regularly in family meals. The house itself serves as a fortress against supernatural threats, its design and decoration incorporating protective elements that most visitors never notice. Doorways are marked with symbols that invoke divine protection while warning away hostile forces. Windows face directions that maximize beneficial influences while minimizing exposure to dangerous ones. Interior spaces are arranged to facilitate the flow of positive energy while creating barriers against negative influences. Storage areas for food and valuable possessions include protective amulets that guard against both human theft and supernatural appropriation. Clay vessels containing grain are marked with hieroglyphs that invoke Renunutet, the cobra goddess who protects harvests. Chests holding precious items bear symbols associated with Bes, the dwarf god whose grotesque appearance frightens away demons and malevolent spirits. The family's approach to medical care integrates physical treatment with spiritual protection, understanding that illness often has supernatural as well as natural causes. They maintain relationships with healers who understand both herbal medicine and magical practices, practitioners who can address the spiritual dimensions of disease that purely physical treatments might miss. Their home medicine chest includes amulets designed to prevent specific illnesses, alongside herbs and other substances used for treatment. Education within the family emphasizes the transmission of knowledge that enhances survival in a world where supernatural forces play active roles in daily life. Children learn to recognize omens and interpret signs that indicate changes in divine favor. They memorize protective prayers and formulas that can provide emergency spiritual assistance when formal ritual is impossible. Most importantly, they absorb attitudes of respect and humility that reduce the likelihood of accidentally offending divine sensibilities through ignorance or carelessness. In the bustling streets of modern Cairo, where ancient stones lie buried beneath layers of history and cell phone towers rise where temples once reached toward the sky, echoes of pharaonic wisdom still whisper through the daily rhythms of Egyptian life. The fellahin who work the fields along the Nile perform actions that would seem familiar to their ancestors from 5,000 years ago, their hands moving in patterns that connect them to agricultural traditions older than most civilizations. The farmers still watch the river with eyes that see more than mere water flowing toward the sea. They observe the subtle changes in current and color that indicate the Nile's mood, reading signs that their forebears interpreted as messages from divine powers. When the annual flood arrives, bringing its gift of fertile silt, celebration mingles with relief in ways that echo ancient festivals honoring the gods of abundance and renewal. The timing may have changed with modern dams and irrigation systems, but the fundamental relationship between human prosperity and the river's generosity remains unchanged. In village markets throughout the Nile Valley, vendors still arrange their goods according to principles that blend practical considerations with inherited wisdom about attracting good fortune and avoiding malevolent influences. Fruits and vegetables are displayed in patterns that would make sense to ancient practitioners of sympathetic magic, their colors and arrangements designed to invoke prosperity and abundance. The silver jewelry worn by many merchants includes symbols that descend directly from pharaonic traditions. The Ankh, the Eye of Horus, stylized scarabs that promise protection and renewal. Traditional healing practices preserve elements of ancient Egyptian medicine that combined empirical observation with spiritual intervention. Village healers, known locally as hakims, still employ techniques that address both physical symptoms and their supposed supernatural causes. Their remedies often incorporate substances that played important roles in pharaonic medicine: honey for its antiseptic properties, garlic for its ability to repel harmful influences, oils and herbs that serve both medicinal and magical purposes. The preparation of these remedies follows procedures that echo ancient ritual practices. timing remains important, with certain treatments prepared only during specific phases of the moon or particular hours of the day. The healer's approach to patients incorporates elements of spiritual diagnosis alongside physical examination, seeking to understand the patient's relationship with forces that extend beyond the purely material realm. Religious observances in contemporary Egypt reflect the layering of traditions that characterizes the region's spiritual landscape. While Islam has been the dominant faith for over a millennium, practices associated with holy sites often incorporate elements that can be traced back to pharaonic precedents. The veneration of saints at local shrines sometimes occurs at locations that were sacred to ancient Egyptian deities, suggesting continuities that transcend theological boundaries. The concept of baraka, divine blessing that can be transmitted through contact with holy people and places, operates according to principles that would be recognizable to ancient Egyptian priests. Pilgrims seek baraka at shrines and tombs, much as their ancestors sought divine favor at temples and sacred sites. The belief that spiritual power can be concentrated in specific locations and accessed through proper approach and attitude reflects understanding that connects modern practice with ancient wisdom. Coptic Christianity, Egypt's indigenous Christian tradition, preserves elements that bridge ancient and modern spiritual practices. Coptic art and architecture incorporate symbols that derive from pharaonic sources, adapted to serve Christian purposes, but retaining recognizable connections to their ancient origins. The Ankh transformed into the crux ansata, a distinctly Coptic cross that maintains its association with life and divine protection. The Eye of Horus appears in modified forms that invoke divine watchfulness and protection. Coptic ritual practices include elements that suggest continuity with ancient Egyptian religious traditions. The use of incense in worship follows patterns that would be familiar to pharaonic priests, while the timing of ceremonies often reflects astronomical considerations that echo ancient practices. The veneration of saints now includes attributes and iconography that sometimes parallel characteristics of ancient Egyptian deities, suggesting adaptive strategies that allowed essential spiritual concepts to survive theological transitions. In the realm of popular culture, ancient Egyptian symbols continue to carry meanings that transcend their historical contexts. The Ankh appears on jewelry and decorations throughout the modern world, worn by people who may not understand its original significance, but who respond to its association with life and protection. The Eye of Horus decorates everything from athletic shoes to architectural elements, its stylized form recognized globally as a symbol of vigilance and spiritual insight. Contemporary interest in ancient Egyptian spirituality has created movements that attempt to reconstruct pharaonic religious practices for modern practitioners. While these efforts often involve considerable interpretation and adaptation, they reflect the enduring appeal of Egyptian approaches to divine relationship. The emphasis on balance, the integration of spiritual and practical concerns, and the understanding of cosmic order as something that requires human cooperation continue to resonate with people seeking alternatives to purely materialistic worldviews. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal aspects of ancient Egyptian life that illuminate the sophistication of their survival strategies. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of medical practices that combined empirical observation with spiritual intervention in ways that demonstrate remarkable understanding of psychosomatic relationships. Ancient papyrus texts reveal mathematical and astronomical knowledge that enabled precise predictions of celestial events, allowing priests to maintain credibility as interpreters of divine will. The preservation of ancient Egyptian monuments and artifacts serves purposes that extend beyond historical education to encompass cultural continuity and spiritual inspiration. The pyramids of Giza continue to attract visitors who seek to understand the civilization that created them, while museum collections around the world display objects that carry the aesthetic and spiritual sensibilities of their creators across millennia. These encounters with ancient Egyptian culture often inspire contemporary artists, writers, and spiritual seekers who find in pharaonic civilization a model for integrating material and spiritual concerns. Modern environmental movements sometimes draw inspiration from ancient Egyptian understanding of the relationship between human activity and natural systems. The concept of Ma'at, cosmic order, that encompasses both moral and environmental balance, provides a framework for thinking about sustainability that predates contemporary environmental science by thousands of years. The Egyptian understanding that human prosperity depends on maintaining harmonious relationships with natural forces offers perspectives that remain relevant to current environmental challenges. The study of ancient Egyptian civilization continues to yield insights that influence contemporary fields ranging from psychology to architecture to organizational management. The Egyptian approach to leadership, which emphasized the pharaoh's role as mediator between divine and human realms, provides models for understanding authority that transcends mere political power. Their integration of artistic and functional considerations in architecture influences contemporary designers who seek to create buildings that serve both practical and spiritual purposes. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the modern city sleeps and ancient rhythms reassert themselves, the Nile still flows northward, carrying the accumulated wisdom of centuries in its eternal current. The farmers who rise to tend their fields, the bakers who prepare bread for the day's meals, the mothers who whisper protective prayers over sleeping children, all participate in patterns of life that connect them to ancestors whose understanding of survival encompassed both practical skills and spiritual wisdom. The legacy of ancient Egyptian approaches to divine relationship survives not only in monuments and museums, but in the continuing human need to find meaning and protection in a world that often seems chaotic and threatening. Their integration of practical and spiritual concerns, their understanding of the importance of maintaining proper relationships with forces greater than themselves, and their development of survival strategies that encompassed both material and supernatural dimensions, continue to offer guidance for those willing to learn from the accumulated wisdom of one of humanity's greatest civilizations. As the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, following paths that guided Egyptian priests in their calculations and farmers in their planting, the wisdom of the pharaohs continues to whisper across the centuries with lessons that remain as relevant today as they were when the pyramids were young. The gods of Egypt may no longer receive offerings in golden temples, but the principles they embodied, the importance of balance, the necessity of respect for forces greater than ourselves, the understanding that survival requires harmony between human ambition and cosmic order, speak to truths that transcend any particular religious system. In our modern world of electric lights and climate control, where we often imagine ourselves independent of natural forces and spiritual concerns, the ancient Egyptians remind us that true security comes not from controlling our environment, but from understanding our place within larger patterns of existence. Their sophisticated strategies for navigating divine displeasure offer insights into managing uncertainty and finding stability in the midst of change that speak to contemporary anxieties about environmental crisis, social disruption, and personal meaning. The Nile still flows through Egypt, carrying the same life-giving waters that sustained pharaonic civilization, but it also carries memories of wisdom that recognized divinity in natural processes and found spiritual significance in daily routines. The river's seasonal rhythms remind us that survival and prosperity depend on working with natural cycles rather than against them, accepting our dependence on forces beyond our control while taking responsibility for maintaining harmonious relationships with the systems that support life. Perhaps the most enduring gift of ancient Egyptian civilization is its demonstration that spiritual wisdom and practical intelligence need not be separate or competing approaches to existence. The same priests who performed elaborate rituals to maintain cosmic balance also developed sophisticated technologies for agriculture, medicine, and construction that served their communities for thousands of years. Their integration of sacred and secular concerns offers a model for finding meaning and purpose in daily life that enriches both material prosperity and spiritual fulfillment. As you settle into sleep tonight, carried by the gentle current of these ancient stories toward whatever dreams await you in the realm beyond waking consciousness, remember that you are part of a tradition that stretches back to the very dawn of civilization. The same stars that shine down upon your rest once guided Egyptian astronomers in their sacred calculations, while the same human needs for security, meaning, and connection that shaped your day once motivated the development of wisdom traditions that helped entire civilizations survive and flourish. The gods of ancient Egypt may have taken new names and forms over the millennia, but the forces they represented, the creative power of the sun, the life-giving flow of water, the protective love of devoted relationships, the transformative potential of death and renewal, continue to shape human experience in ways both obvious and subtle. Their stories remind us that we are not isolated individuals struggling alone against an indifferent universe, but participants in cosmic dramas that connect us to powers and purposes greater than our individual concerns. Sleep peacefully, knowing that the wisdom of ages watches over your rest, that the same protective principles that guided ancient Egyptians through thousands of years of change and challenge continue to operate in forms adapted to contemporary circumstances. The eye of Horus still sees, the scarab still rolls its burden toward transformation, the Ankh still promises life that transcends temporary difficulties. In the darkness that embraces all earthly concerns, ancient light continues to shine, carrying the accumulated wisdom of humanity's longest conversation with the sacred dimensions of existence. The stories we have shared tonight join the eternal current of human memory that flows like the Nile itself, carrying the essential nutrients of wisdom from past to future, from the ancient temples of Karnak to whatever sacred spaces you create in your own life. Rest well, and may your dreams be filled with the golden light of understanding that illuminates the path between the practical and the sacred, the human and the divine, the temporary and the eternal.